All right, number 62 is called the Röttgen Pietà. This is late Gothic, 14th century, so it's 1300 to 1325, but you could always just say 14th century, and this is painted wood. All right, some questions we need to be able to answer when we're done with this one is, how is this depicting humanization? And then how is the lamentation different than the theme of the Pietà? It's a very common theme used in medieval artwork. And then how does the intended emotional impact vary for the audience who's viewing these different artworks that are still very similar in subject? Okay, so first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna write about the form. So if we were in class, we would all give out ideas, right? Describe how anguish is being portrayed. How is the artist depicting agony and anguish? What are some ideas? There's lots of things to write about here. The first thing we're going to talk about is the size of the heads being completely disproportionate or unproportional to the rest of the body. And that's very intentional, right? That's an intentional decision the artist made so that you can focus on their facial expressions. All right, and let's look at Mary's facial expressions first. So how would you describe, how is she depicting anguish based on her body language or her facial expression? So she is heartbroken, she's angry, she's confused. And then part of what the artist's doing is giving her that furrowed brow to give her all those expressions. She's tilting her head toward her son, and this is depicting her humanity. And what we need to talk about that, about depicting her humanity, is how is this breaking from tradition? How is this something we haven't seen before? Our previous Marys are very calm, very serene, kind of at peace with knowing what's going to happen. Even though these two other Marys, she has the child Jesus in her lap, still at this time when Mary would be holding her dead son, she would still be at peace with it. So in Catholic tradition, Mary had a special foreknowledge of the resurrection of Christ. So images that reflect Mary's divine knowledge show her at peace while holding her dead son. So this is a very different take on the Pietà. All right, so context, things that are happening at this time period. So in earlier centuries, so if you're looking at the stained glass window, that's an example of Gothic, but it's early Gothic. Remember, that was even done before the cathedral burnt down. In earlier centuries, the writing and art focused on the divinity of Christ. Now, later, for later Gothic, in the 13th and 14th centuries, the human aspects of Christ, Mary, and others are being emphasized. So this is a difference between late Gothic humanization and then early Gothic artwork. So now we're seeing the expressions and the feelings of what could have been felt at the moment of the stories that are being told. Also, this is made in Germany, and this is during a time of extreme suffering, plague, and they're starving, and hunger, all those fun things. So how is this going to impact the viewers, right, when they're seeing these? What is the intended impact? Why was that stained glass window made? How is it supposed to affect the viewer versus the Röttgen Pietà? How is that piece supposed to affect the viewer? All right, so early Gothic with our stained glass window, it's supposed to create a spiritual awakening, right? What did we talk about that is supposed to create a spiritual awakening? And then Mary's being depicted as calm and serene. She's more accepting of her son's fate. She knows what's going to happen and she's at peace with it. That is the way it is. This is the way. All right, and then you have your later Gothic, a really good example of humanism. So being more humanistic, creating a feeling of empathy by relating to Mary as a mother grieving for the loss of her only son. If you want to summarize this, the early Gothic is more distant from real human, feelings and emotions, versus the later Gothic being more relatable, especially at the time period this is being made and where it's being made. They can relate to this feeling of suffering and grieving. All right, here's another comparison. And remember, the work on the right is not in our image set. This is a really famous Renaissance artwork by Michelangelo called the Pietà, and this is marble. So there was a test question where it had you talk about this piece, and you're supposed to be relating it to the Röttgen Pietà. So which one of these do you think would have a more emotional response from the viewer? If you were to see both of these, how would you feel? Do you think you'd feel the same? Think you'd feel different? That's what we talk about if we were in class. All right, well, what we need to know is that they're both depicting the exact same thing. So Michelangelo's piece is called Pietà. Pietà means pity or compassion. It's a really common subject for artists in this time period to be depicting because they're all depicting religious artworks. So the Pietà is just a common theme. What you're seeing in the Pietà is Mary being sad, right? Sorrowfully contemplating the dead body of her son, who she is holding in her lap. And Michelangelo is portraying it very differently than the Röttgen Pietà is being portrayed. The Michelangelo one, not really completely realistic in proportions because Mary is huge just so that she can hold her adult son in her lap. Her age, she's like eternally youthful, even though, you know, Jesus is like 30 something and she would be older than him, but she still looks young. She's not even touching his flesh because he's so sacred. She's using the fabric to hold him and support him with her body. What's also interesting to note is the size of these two pieces. So our piece, Röttgen Pietà, is 2 feet tall, right? That's not very large. Michelangelo's piece is life-size or larger. I saw it, but it was behind glass, so it was hard to tell if it was larger than life-size, but it is very large. That's all out of marble. All right, we also need to be able to distinguish the Pietà, which is a common theme in artwork, to the Lamentation, which is another common theme in artwork. And this Lamentation piece is by Giotto. We're going to be looking at this. He's like our bridge between Gothic and Renaissance. He's going to bring us into the Renaissance. So for his artwork, we're going to talk about, it's called Lamentation. And it's basically the same idea. It is Mary being very sad and sorrowful. It's when they remove Jesus down from the cross, but there's more people. It's more of a group scene. Mary Magdalene is always in the scene versus the Pietà, which just has Mary and her son. All right, how is Jesus being depicted? How are we seeing anguish here? So there's a couple ways you can describe the wounds. It's been described as grape-like drops of blood, which is another reference to the Eucharist. The Eucharist is just like the communion where you take the bread and the wine. You're taking like a piece of him during that ceremony. Large gaping wounds, like this looks open. And then you can describe it as being 3-dimensional blood that's actually exploding out. And then he is an emaciated corpse, which you can see by the protruding ribs. And if you look at his face, the artist painted the droplets of blood coming down from the crown of thorns. There's blood also on his arm, kind of dripping all around. Protruding eyebrow ridge here is making the eyes look more sunken in. And then he's also been given hollow cheeks. And then, I don't know if you can see his hand and his foot also have that exploding, gaping wound. This is called, or the similarity of exploding wounds of the stigmata is similar in the rosettes that are on the base. And the stigmata, that just means the marks that were made during the crucifixion. That's the stigmata. All right, function, and this relates to the size of this piece. So this would have been a devotional image known as this German word, I'm going to butcher it, but Andachtsbild. So that means used for private devotion. So this would have been in someone's house, in their altar, used to, worship and pray to and relate to. Much like this Egyptian artwork that was small and it was in someone's home altar. So very different than Michelangelo's Pietà. You can't, well, I guess you can, but it'd be really hard to have a life-size marble statue in your home altar. Function meant to elicit a response of empathy and to bring that moment alive. And you're supposed to feel a connection to their suffering and relate it to your own. All right, then how can you relate that to the seated boxer? So what I want you guys to do on your note page, I have some of these different artworks on the bottom. I want you to make some connections between these different between these artworks and the Röttgen Pietà. How are they relatable? And then on the note page for Chartres Cathedral, I had a section where I was asking you, what is the intended impact on the viewer supposed to be for both of these, and how is it different?